would you grab if you had just 20 minutes to leave your home forever? Imagine waking up one morning to the sound of explosions. Not fireworks, not thunder. Real explosions that shake the walls of your home. Imagine having only 20 minutes to pack your entire life into a single bay. The life of a refugee. The life of a refugee. The life of a refugee ekpak. To decide which fragments of your existence are worth saving, knowing everything else will be left behind forever. This is not fiction. This is the beginning of a refugee's journey. This is Amira's story. Hello everyone and welcome back to LMJ English. I'm thrilled to have you join us today for another powerful story designed to enhance your English skills, while opening windows to experiences that shape our world. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you'll never miss our weekly English learning adventures. Today, we're diving into the life of a refugee, a journey of extraordinary courage, resilience, and hope in the face of unimaginable challenges. Through Amira's story, we'll explore not only the hardships of fleeing one's homeland, but also the complex process of rebuilding a life in a foreign land where even the simplest interaction becomes a mountain to climb without language skills. By understanding Amira's experience, we gain perspective on the millions of displaced people around the world while practicing our English comprehension and expanding our vocabulary. So let's begin this journey together, a journey that will take us from the war-torn streets of Syria to the confusing but promising landscapes of a new beginning. Fleeing home, when staying is no longer an option. The morning that changed Amira's life forever began like any other. She prepared breakfast for her family, checked her university notes, and planned to meet friends for coffee later that afternoon. At 22, she was in her final year of medical studies, already volunteering at the local hospital and dreaming of becoming a pediatrician. Her family, parents, younger brother, and elderly grandmother, had managed to maintain some semblance of normalcy, despite 4 years of escalating conflict in Syria. They had stayed when many neighbors fled, believing the violence would never reach their relatively peaceful district. They were wrong. The explosive sound of airstrikes rattled their windows just before noon, not in the distance this time, but barely a few blocks away. Her father rushed into the house, face ashen with fear and determination. "We leave now," he said, his voice leaving no room for questions. "Pack only what you can carry. We have 20 minutes." In that moment, the abstract concept of becoming a refugee crystallized into harsh reality. What do you take when your entire life must fit into a backpack? Amira grabbed her passport, family photos, a medical textbook, and a small pouch containing her mother's gold earrings, traditional gifts from her wedding day, that might someday become emergency currency. Their journey to the border was a nightmare of checkpoints, hiding, and constant fear. They traveled primarily at night, joining a desperate caravan of others seeking escape. Amira's grandmother struggled with the pace, and each kilometer became an exercise in both physical endurance and emotional control. "Don't look back," her father would say whenever she hesitated. "Looking back only slows you down." But how could she not look back at the only home she had ever known, now shrinking in the distance, possibly forever? After 12 grueling days, they reached the refugee camp across the border. What greeted them was both a relief and a new kind of horror, safety from bombs, but the beginning of limbo. Row upon row of identical white tents stretched across dusty ground housing thousands of displaced people. This would be their home for the next 17 months. Here Amira experienced the peculiar suspension of time that defines refugee existence. Days bleeding into each other, waiting for interviews, waiting for paperwork, waiting for any news about resettlement. The medical student who once managed complex schedules now had nothing but time, stretching endlessly before her like the barren campground. It was in the camp that Amira began to understand that becoming a refugee meant more than physical displacement. It meant entering a strange state of existence where your past qualifications meant little, your future remained uncertain, and your present required constant adaptation to survive. Yet even here, human resilience emerged. Informal schools appeared. Intense. Amira volunteered to teach children basic science, using drawings in dirt when no paper was available. Her father joined a committee helping to distribute supplies fairly. They were no longer just victims of circumstance, but participants in a makeshift community, holding on to dignity through contribution. The news finally came on a sweltering afternoon. They had been accepted for resettlement, not to Germany, where Amira's university credits might transfer more easily, but to the United States, a country she had only seen in movies, with a language she barely spoke beyond medical terminology. Equal parts terror and relief washed over her. The waiting was over, but the real challenge of building a completely new life was just beginning. As their plane lifted off months later, Amira pressed her palm against the small window, watching the landscape of her region grow smaller, carrying the weight of all she was leaving behind while facing the vast unknown ahead, a new beginning in a foreign land. The airport arrival hall in Chicago seemed designed to overwhelm. Fluorescent lights illuminated every corner of the vast space, reflecting off polished floors and creating a brightness that hurt Amira's eyes after the long, dimly lit flight. Signs with unfamiliar words pointed in various directions, their meanings lost on her, despite the basic English lessons she had received in the refugee camp. The cacophony of announcements, conversations, and rolling luggage created a wall of sound that made it difficult to think clearly. A woman holding a sign with their family name approached with a wide smile that Amira found herself unable to return. The resettlement agency caseworker spoke slowly, enunciating each word carefully, but understanding remained just beyond Amira's grasp. She caught fragments. Welcome. Apartment. Tomorrow meeting. While nodding politely, afraid to reveal how little she comprehended. Her father, once a respected engineer who managed large teams, now stood silently beside her, equally lost in this new reality where his authority and competence seemed suddenly diminished. Their assigned apartment was located in a neighborhood where multiple refugee families had been resettled. Small but clean, it contained donated furniture, basic kitchen supplies, and beds with plastic-covered mattresses. The walls were an institutional beige, devoid of the colorful tapestries and family photos that had adorned their home in Syria. Amira stood in the center of what would be her new bedroom, smaller than her closet had been back home, and felt the crushing weight of displacement. "This is temporary," she whispered to herself in Arabic. "Just a beginning." But even this attempt at self-comfort highlighted her new reality. Her native language, once a natural extension of her identity, had suddenly become a private dialect, useless for navigating the world outside their apartment door. The cultural differences manifested in countless daily interactions. Americans stood at what felt like uncomfortable distances during conversations. They asked direct questions about experiences that seemed too painful or personal to share with strangers. Time operated differently. Appointments were expected to be kept to the minute, not within the flexible hour that had been customary at home. Even food, that most basic comfort, became alien. The grocery store presented overwhelming choices, yet somehow lacked the specific ingredients for dishes that represented home and comfort. Most challenging was the sudden invisibility of her previous identity. In Syria, Amira had been a promising medical student, recognized for her intelligence and dedication. Here she struggled to explain her basic needs to store clerks. When she mentioned her medical training to the caseworker, she was gently told that without English fluency and equivalency exams, that path would be difficult. Many refugees start with entry-level positions, the woman explained kindly. The suggestion that she might work as a cleaner or fast food server when she had once been on track to become a doctor crystallized the profound loss of status that accompanied refugee life. Nights were often the hardest. While her family slept, Amira would open her laptop to scroll through photos of friends from university. Many now scattered across different countries. Some had continued their studies in Europe, their lives progressing while hers felt suspended. She messaged them occasionally, but found it increasingly difficult to bridge the growing gap between their experiences. How could she explain that she had spent an entire day trying to figure out how to pay an electricity bill or use the public transportation system? The simplest tasks required enormous mental energy when performed in a language and system she barely understood. Yet even in these difficult early days, small moments of connection appeared like tiny flames in darkness. The elderly Ukrainian woman who lived upstairs demonstrated how to use the laundry machines through elaborate pantomime that ended with both of them laughing. The Middle Eastern grocery store owner, who recognized their dialect and offered tea while helping them find ingredients from home. The library where she discovered books with dual language text, building bridges between her past and future word by word. These moments reminded Amira that while she had lost her home, her humanity remained intact, and with it, the capacity to build connection across the seemingly insurmountable barriers of language and culture. Learning to communicate, the power of language. The small community college classroom buzzed with nervous energy as Amira took her seat for her first official English as a second language class. Around her sat 15 other adults from countries spanning the globe, Somalia, Ukraine, Venezuela, Afghanistan, all united by their shared experience of displacement and the urgent need to master English. The teacher, a woman with kind eyes, found deliberately slow speech wrote on the whiteboard, "Language is freedom." Amira copied this into her notebook, understanding the profound truth of these 3 simple words, perhaps more deeply than any native English speaker ever could. The early days of language learning were exercises in humility and persistence. Amira, who had excelled academically her entire life, now struggled with concepts that children mastered effortlessly. Pronunciation proved particularly challenging. The th sound that appeared everywhere in English simply didn't exist in Arabic. She practiced for hours in front of the bathroom mirror, tongue between teeth, determined to master this alien sound. Verb tenses twisted her thoughts into knots. How could one language have so many ways to express time? Past simple, past continuous, past perfect, continuous, each with subtle differences that eluded her grasp. Outside the classroom, every interaction became both a test and an opportunity. The first time Amira successfully ordered coffee without the barista switching to exaggerated gestures felt like winning an Olympic medal. A brief conversation about the weather with a neighbor, superficial by any standard, represented a breakthrough in her ability to engage in casual social exchange. She began carrying a small notebook everywhere, jotting down new words and phrases she encountered, reviewing them before sleep each night like precious treasures. Communication barriers created situations that ranged from frustrating to dangerous. When her brother developed a high fever, Amira struggled to explain his symptoms to the clinic receptionist, fighting tears of frustration as she searched for medical terms she once knew fluently in her native language. A misunderstanding about their lease nearly resulted in an eviction warning until a bilingual neighbor intervened to clarify. Each miscommunication underscored how language was not merely about expression, but about protection, advocacy, and survival in their new reality. Gradually, Amira developed creative strategies to bridge the gaps in her English. She used simple drawings when words failed, carried a digital translator for emergencies, and mastered the art of circumlocution, describing objects or concepts when specific vocabulary eluded her. The thing you use to remove the outside of vegetables became her way of asking for a peeler. Her family laughed when she referred to an umbrella as a rain roof for one person, but such linguistic innovations often succeeded in conveying her meaning. Television became an unexpected language teacher. Amira discovered that children's shows provided clear, simple language with visual context that helped vocabulary stick in her memory. She progressed to watching the evening news with subtitles, pausing to look up unfamiliar words. American sitcoms introduced her to idioms and slang that never appeared in textbooks but proved essential for daily interactions. Her younger brother became fluent far more quickly, his accent nearly indistinguishable from American-born peers within months, while Amira's speech remained heavily influenced by her native language, a pattern common among refugee families that often shifted parent-child dynamics as children became linguistic and cultural interpreters. The moment Amira recognized she had begun thinking in English marked a profound transition. It happened unexpectedly while she was riding the bus. Her internal monologue had shifted languages without her conscious awareness. She felt simultaneously proud and slightly melancholic, sensing that each step toward English fluency somehow distanced her from her mother tongue. Yet with increasing language ability came increasing confidence. 6 months after arrival, she successfully advocated for herself at the Department of Motor Vehicles. 9 months in, she helped an elderly neighbor complete health insurance forms. Small victories accumulated into a growing sense of capability. Language acquisition opened doors that had seemed permanently closed during those first overwhelming weeks. Amira qualified for a medical assistant training program that would recognize some of her previous education while building her healthcare vocabulary. Her father found part-time work as a mathematics tutor once he could explain equations, even with his still limited English. Each new word represented not merely vocabulary, but expanded possibility. The difference between surviving in their new country and actually building a future within it, building a foundation for the future. 13 months after arriving in the United States, Amira sat in the financial aid office of the community college, nervously clutching a folder containing her transcripts from Syria, painfully translated and evaluated by an educational credential service. The process had been expensive and complex, requiring documentation from a university that now existed in a war zone. Many of her records had been deemed incomplete or unverifiable, academic achievements reduced to question marks by circumstances beyond her control. The counselor reviewed her file with a neutral expression that Amira had come to recognize as the American professional face, revealing nothing while decisions about her future were being contemplated. "Your science backgrounds are strong," the woman finally said, "but the medical path in America is long and extremely expensive." She explained the years of undergraduate prerequisites, MCAT exams, medical school applications, and residency that would be required to become a doctor in the United States. "Many international students find allied health professions more accessible," she added gently, sliding brochures for nursing and radiology programs across the desk. Amira felt the familiar sting of dreams deferred. In Syria, she had been less than a year from her medical degree. Here she faced starting almost from the beginning, navigating a labyrinthine educational system while working to support her family. The financial aid forms themselves required a cultural and linguistic fluency she was still developing. Terms like dependent status, expected family contribution, and subsidized loans formed a specialized vocabulary of American bureaucracy that even native speakers found confusing. Housing presented its own complex challenges. Their initial apartment, arranged by the resettlement agency, had been intended as temporary accommodation. Finding affordable permanent housing required navigating rental applications, credit checks, and lease agreements filled with legal terminology. Without rental history or established credit, they faced skeptical landlords, despite having refugee status and work authorization. Amira's father, who had once owned a spacious home in Damascus, now struggled to convince property managers that his family would be reliable tenants. Each rejection reinforced the sense of precarity that characterized their new existence. Financial management in America required learning entirely new systems. Banking, which had been a straightforward process in Syria, now involved choosing between complex account options with different fee structures and minimum balance requirements. Credit remained an abstract and somewhat mysterious concept, necessary for everything from renting apartments to purchasing cell phones, yet difficult to establish without prior history. Amira created spreadsheets to track every expense, developing a hyper-vigilant relationship with money born from the knowledge that they had no financial safety net. The social service system presented a maze of agencies, eligibility requirements, and paperwork. Initial refugee assistance provided a crucial but temporary bridge. Navigating the transition to self-sufficiency required learning which benefits they qualified for and for how long. Case managers changed frequently, each requiring Amira to re-explain their situation. She became the family's de facto administrator, spending hours researching resources, completing applications, and sitting in government office waiting rooms. Her improving English made her the designated spokesperson, shifting family dynamics as her parents became increasingly dependent on her interactions with official systems. Cultural orientation programs provided valuable but sometimes insufficient guidance. Classes covered practical topics like using public transportation, finding employment, and accessing healthcare, but could not fully prepare them for the subtle cultural codes that governed American social interaction. Amira learned through trial and error about appropriate personal questions, physical distance in conversation, and the peculiarly American combination of friendliness without deeper connection. Each misstep, like bringing an elaborate homemade dish to a casual potluck where others brought store-bought items, highlighted the gap between knowing about a culture and truly understanding its unwritten rules. Despite these challenges, Amira gradually established the building blocks for a future. She secured part-time work as a pharmacy technician, finding the medical terminology familiar territory even as she learned new systems. The position paid modestly, but offered flexibility around her class schedule and valuable healthcare exposure. Her father found work as a night security guard, a dramatic step down from his engineering career, but steady income that allowed him to maintain his role as a provider. Her mother, who had never worked outside the home in Syria, began caring for neighbors' children, converting one of their few advantages, availability during working hours, into additional family income. Each small achievement, opening a savings account, receiving their first positive credit score, successfully registering for college classes, represented not just practical progress, but psychological victories over the displacement and powerlessness that had characterized their early months as refugees. Amira kept a journal documenting these milestones, understanding instinctively that acknowledging progress was essential to maintaining momentum through a rebuilding process that would span years rather than months. On particularly difficult days, she would read these entries, reminding herself how far they had already come from those first overwhelming weeks in a strange new country, creating a support network. The community center, occupying a former storefront, in their neighborhood had seen better days. Paint peeled from the walls, fluorescent lights flickered unevenly, and mismatched furniture filled the main room. Yet to Amira, this shabby space represented an unexpected turning point in her American experience. A flyer, printed in multiple languages including Arabic, had caught her attention at the bus stop advertising free conversational English practice. Desperate to accelerate her language learning, she had decided to attend despite her natural shyness. What she found was far more than an English class. The New Neighbors program brought together refugees, immigrants, and American volunteers for language exchange, practical assistance, and most importantly, human connection. Here, Amira met Fatima, an Iraqi woman who had arrived 3 years earlier and now worked as a medical interpreter at the local hospital. "The first year feels impossible," Fatima told her over sweet tea after the session. "The second year gets better. By the third, you start helping newcomers instead of being one." This simple trajectory, from helped to helper, offered Amira her first glimpse of a future where her refugee status might become just one part of her identity rather than its defining feature. Unexpected allies appeared in various forms. Mrs. Chen, an elderly Chinese-American woman who lived in their apartment building, began leaving vegetables from her community garden plot at their door after noticing Amira's mother struggling to afford fresh produce. Though they shared no common language, beyond smiles and gestures, a genuine friendship developed through this simple act of neighboring. The pharmacy manager who detected Amira's medical background and began mentoring her, sharing information about certification programs and occasionally assigning her tasks that utilized her knowledge rather than just her ability to count pills. Formal support systems provided crucial resources, but often came with limitations and expiration dates. Their initial resettlement agency offered intensive support for only the first few months, after which case managers with overwhelming caseloads had little time for individualized assistance. Government benefit programs that had provided a safety net during their early months came with strict time limits, designed to push refugees toward self-sufficiency, sometimes before they had developed the language skills and cultural knowledge necessary to succeed. In this gap between formal support and true independence, community-based organizations became lifelines. A mutual assistance association formed by earlier refugees from the Middle East offered guidance navigating systems they had already mastered. Faith communities, both from their own religious tradition and interfaith groups, provided practical help with transportation, furniture, and occasionally emergency financial assistance. Cultural associations organized celebrations of holidays from their homeland, creating spaces where they could temporarily step back into familiar customs and languages. Digital connections spanned the geographical distances that physical displacement had created. Social media groups connected Amira with Syrian refugees across the globe, sharing resources and experiences. WhatsApp messages maintained ties with family members scattered across 3 continents. These virtual communities provided emotional support that complemented local connections, allowing Amira to maintain her cultural identity while building her American life. Slowly, Amira began rebuilding the sense of belonging that had been shattered by displacement. The process was neither linear nor complete. Certain spaces still triggered acute awareness of her outsider status, while others began to feel like genuine extensions of home. The community garden where she now tended her own plot alongside Mrs. Chen, the study group at the community college, where her academic background earned respect from classmates. The volunteer medical clinic, where she had begun interpreting for Arabic-speaking patients on weekends. Each represented a thread in a new social fabric she was carefully weaving. The concept of community itself required redefinition in this new context. In Syria, community had been organic and generational. Extended family, lifelong neighbors, religious and ethnic connections that required no explanation or effort to maintain. Here, building community required intentional action, reaching across differences in language, culture, and experience to find common ground. This active construction of belonging represented one of the less visible but most essential tasks of refugee adaptation. Most profound was the transition from receiving support to offering it to others. 18 months after her arrival, Amira began volunteering as an orientation guide for newly arrived refugees, drawing on her own experience to ease their transition, explaining bus routes, demonstrating how to use laundromat machines, translating at medical appointments. Each task represented both practical assistance and a powerful message. You are not alone in this journey. In helping others navigate the challenges she had faced, Amira reclaimed a sense of agency and purpose that the refugee experience had temporarily diminished, facing and overcoming prejudice. The job interview had been going well until the manager glanced at Amira's resume and his expression subtly shifted. "You've only been in the country for 2 years?" he asked, his tone now containing a note of hesitation that hadn't been present moments before. "Your English is—" He paused, searching for words. "Adequate for basic tasks, but our customers expect perfect communication." Amira knew her English, while accented, was more than adequate for the pharmacy technician position. She had been handling complex medical terminology in her coursework with excellent grades. But something in the manager's demeanor told her the real concern wasn't her language skills but her otherness, her headscarf, her accent, her refugee status. Incidents like this rarely manifested as overt discrimination. Instead, they appeared as subtle shifts in treatment. Clerks who addressed her American-born friend while ignoring her presence, landlords who suddenly remembered additional requirements when she inquired about available apartments, classmates who expressed surprise at her academic capabilities. "You're so articulate," one lab partner had commented, the compliment revealing an underlying assumption that her background predicted poor communication skills. Each interaction contained a hidden message. "You don't fully belong here." More direct encounters occasionally pierced this veil of politeness. "Go back to your country," a man had muttered when her family conversed in Arabic at a bus stop. Online comments on news articles about refugee resettlement contained venomous assertions about taking American jobs and importing terrorism that made Amira physically ill when she encountered them. A neighbor had questioned why her family received special government benefits. They didn't. Their initial resettlement assistance had ended months earlier, making assumptions about entitlements that bore no relationship to their actual experience of cobbling together minimum wage jobs while paying taxes like any other resident. The psychological impact of these experiences accumulated over time. Amira found herself second-guessing ordinary interactions, wondering whether a store clerk's brusqueness reflected general rudeness or specific prejudice. She became hyper-conscious of her visibility in certain spaces, instinctively lowering her voice when speaking Arabic in public. Most painfully, she sometimes caught herself trying to prove her worthiness through exceptional achievement, as though only excellence could justify her presence in a country where others belonged by birthright alone. Developing strategies to respond to prejudice became an essential survival skill. With casual microaggressions, Amira learned to use gentle education. Actually, I was a medical student before the war forced me to leave Syria to challenge assumptions without escalating tension. For more overtly hostile encounters, she assessed safety first, sometimes choosing to remove herself from situations where confrontation might increase risk. In professional contexts, she documented problematic treatment and sought allies who could advocate from positions of greater privilege. Perhaps most important was the internal work of maintaining her sense of self-worth despite external messages that questioned her value and belonging. Faith provided one anchor, reminding Amira that her worth transcended others' perceptions. Connecting with her cultural heritage through music, food, and community celebrations reinforced her understanding that her identity represented a strength rather than a deficiency. Relationships with other refugees who understood the experience without explanation created safe spaces where she could process painful encounters without having to justify her reactions. Gradually, Amira discovered that her cultural identity contained unexpected assets in her new context. Her multilingualism, initially seen only as a barrier to communication, became a valuable skill in healthcare settings where Arabic-speaking patients needed interpretation. Her experience navigating different cultural systems developed into a form of adaptability and cross-cultural competence that American-born peers often lacked. Even her experience of displacement, painful as it had been, had cultivated resilience and problem-solving abilities that served her well in challenging situations. Some of the most meaningful transformations occurred through sustained personal connections that transcended initial stereotypes. The elderly neighbor who had once watched Amira's family with suspicious eyes gradually softened after Amira helped him navigate a complex Medicare form. A classmate who had made an insensitive comment about terrorists later apologized after working alongside Amira on a group project and hearing fragments of her story. These individual relationships, built through repeated interactions that revealed their shared humanity, often accomplished what abstract discussions about tolerance could not. Amira also discovered allies who recognized and confronted prejudice. From positions of greater social privilege, her pharmacy supervisor intervened when a customer made a derogatory comment, firmly stating that disrespect toward staff would not be tolerated. A professor connected her with a mentorship program specifically designed to support students from refugee backgrounds. These actions demonstrated that while prejudice existed, so too did active commitment to creating a more inclusive society. Through this complex landscape of acceptance and rejection, Amira gradually developed a nuanced understanding of her new country, neither the perfect land of opportunity portrayed in some narratives, nor the uniformly hostile environment depicted in others. America, she realized, contained multitudes, people who feared difference and people who celebrated it, systems that created barriers and programs designed to dismantle them, communities that excluded, and individuals who reached across boundaries to connect. Navigating this contradictory reality required discernment rather than broad generalizations about American culture or attitudes toward refugees. Perhaps most profound was Amira's realization that she need not choose between her Syrian identity and American belonging. The pressure to assimilate, to erase her differences in order to gain acceptance, came from both without and within, yet something in her resisted this false choice. Instead, she began embracing a bicultural identity that integrated elements of both worlds. She could observe Ramadan while participating in Thanksgiving celebrations, maintain her connection to Arabic while becoming fluent in English, honor her family's traditional values while adapting to new cultural contexts. This integration represented not compromise, but expansion, an identity enriched rather than diminished by its multiplicity. Becoming a contributor, from receiver to giver. 3 years after arriving as a refugee, Amira took a deep breath before entering the hospital for her first day as a certified medical assistant. Her navy blue scrubs, purchased second-hand but meticulously pressed, represented more than just a uniform. They symbolized her first step back into the medical field that had once been her intended career path. The position wasn't equivalent to the doctor she had been training to become in Syria, but it placed her squarely in healthcare, utilizing her knowledge and bringing her into contact with patients. Most importantly, it marked a transition from receiving assistance to providing essential services to others. The journey to this moment had required dismantling and rebuilding her expectations about work and professional identity. Like many highly educated refugees, Amira had initially struggled with the disconnect between her previous status and the limited options available in her new country. Her first jobs, cashier at a grocery store, then pharmacy clerk, had felt like steps backward. Yet these positions, though not aligned with her qualifications, had provided crucial experiences, improving her English, developing familiarity with American workplace culture, and building a local employment history that future employers would recognize. Each job had required adapting skills from her previous life to new contexts. The careful observation she had developed in clinical rotations served her well in understanding customer needs. The precision required in pharmaceutical studies transferred to accuracy in handling transactions. The empathy she had cultivated as a medical student helped her connect with customers from diverse backgrounds. Gradually, Amira recognized that while her specific career trajectory had been disrupted, her core capabilities remained intact and valuable, just applied differently than she had originally planned. Finding meaningful work represented only one aspect of the transition from aid recipient to contributor. Equally significant was Amira's involvement in her community through volunteer work. She had begun by offering informal translation at her brother's school, helping other Arabic-speaking families communicate with teachers. This led to a more formal role with a refugee assistance organization, where she conducted orientation sessions for newly arrived families. "When I first explained the bus system or how to use an ATM," she told her mother, I remember how lost we felt. Now I can be the guide I wished we'd had. The financial transition proved equally significant. After months of partial dependence on assistance programs, the family now supported themselves entirely through their combined incomes. Amira's father had found steady work as a maintenance technician, far below his previous engineering position, but providing reliable income and health benefits. Her mother had developed a small catering business, specializing in Syrian dishes, selling at community markets and building a loyal local following. Their tax returns now reflected their status as contributors to the system rather than beneficiaries, a fact that provided particular satisfaction when they encountered comments about refugees being a burden. Perhaps most fulfilling was Amira's role as a cultural bridge in healthcare settings. During her medical assistant shifts, she was often called to interpret for Arabic-speaking patients. Beyond simple translation, this role required explaining cultural concepts in both directions, helping doctors understand cultural contexts that affected treatment adherence, and helping patients navigate an American healthcare system that often seemed impersonal and confusing. In these moments, what had once seemed like a disadvantage, straddling two worlds and fully belonging to neither, became a unique and valuable perspective. Recognition from others reinforced this evolving sense of contribution. The thank you card from an elderly Syrian patient who had finally understood his complicated medication schedule through Amira's explanation. The supervisor who recommended her for additional training based on her exceptional patient interaction skills. The community college instructor who asked her to speak to a class about refugee healthcare needs. Each acknowledgement reinforced that her presence and participation enriched rather than depleted her new community. This transition from receiver to giver fostered a profound psychological shift. The dependency that characterizes initial refugee resettlement, necessary but often deeply uncomfortable for adults accustomed to self-sufficiency, gave way to reciprocity and mutual exchange. Rather than being defined primarily by what she lacked or needed, Amira increasingly identified through what she offered and contributed. This evolution restored a sense of dignity and purpose that had been temporarily disrupted by displacement. Looking toward the future, Amira began exploring pathways to more advanced healthcare roles. A hospital colleague mentioned a Grow Your Own scholarship program designed to help promising medical assistants become nurses. The path would be long, at least 3 more years of education while working, but would bring her closer to her original goal of direct patient care in a professional capacity. For the first time since leaving Syria, Amira allowed herself to plan more than a few months ahead, a subtle but significant indicator of growing stability and hope. Redefining success, a life rebuilt. 5 years after stepping off the plane into the overwhelming brightness of the Chicago airport, Amira sat on a bench in the small community garden that had become her sanctuary. Spring tulips pushed through soil she had carefully prepared, their emergence mirroring her own gradual blossoming in this once foreign land. She had come to the garden to reflect on a momentous decision, whether to accept admission to a competitive nursing program that would eventually lead to the nurse practitioner credential, the closest she might come to her original dream of practicing medicine. The decision involved complex calculations beyond academic considerations. Financially, it would require additional student loans, despite the partial scholarship she had secured. Culturally, it meant delaying marriage longer than was traditional in her community, something her parents had accepted with initial reluctance, but growing pride in her determination. Emotionally, it represented committing fully to building her life in America, rather than maintaining the possibility of someday returning to practice medicine in Syria if peace ever came. The decision crystallized a question she had been grappling with since arrival. What constitutes success when the original path has been irrevocably altered? Her family's definition of success had evolved through their refugee experience. Her father, once defining himself through professional achievement, now found primary satisfaction in having successfully protected his family through catastrophic circumstances. "I would rather be a janitor in peace than an engineer in war," he had told her recently. Her mother, initially disoriented by the necessity of working outside the home, now took immense pride in her catering business, which had grown from occasional market sales to regular restaurant supply orders. Her younger brother, who had arrived as a child and adapted most readily to American life, excelled academically while maintaining connections to their cultural heritage through Arabic poetry clubs and traditional music. Home itself had been redefined through their journey. Their apartment, initially so stark and impersonal compared to their Damascus house, had gradually transformed through carefully chosen objects, textiles, and photographs into a space that reflected their dual identity. Syrian copper trays hung on walls alongside certificates of achievement from American institutions. Traditional floor cushions shared space with a second-hand American sofa. The kitchen cabinets contained both specialized Middle Eastern cooking, implements, and standard American appliances. This physical space embodied what Amira had come to understand. Home was not simply geographic location, but the ability to create meaning and belonging wherever one landed. Similarly, success had required redefinition. In Syria, Amira's path had been relatively linear. Complete medical school, establish a practice, perhaps specialize further. Displacement had shattered this trajectory, forcing her to piece together a different route from the fragments available. Success now meant adaptation, rather than adherence to original plans. Resilience rather than avoidance of obstacles, creativity in finding alternative paths rather than progressing along established ones. This shift from defining success through specific achievements to measuring it through the ability to navigate change represented a profound evolution in her understanding of what constituted a life well lived. Relationships, too, had been transformed by the refugee experience. Family bonds had simultaneously strengthened through shared adversity and strained through different adaptation rates. Amira and her brother had acquired language and cultural fluency more quickly than their parents, creating occasional role reversals that challenged traditional family hierarchies. Yet these challenges had ultimately fostered more flexible family dynamics, with leadership and wisdom recognized wherever they emerged rather than assigned solely by age or gender. Beyond family, Amira had developed a diverse social network spanning multiple cultural backgrounds, fellow refugees who shared similar experiences, American-born friends who provided cultural context, and immigrants from various countries who understood the bicultural balancing act she navigated daily. Perhaps most profound was Amira's evolving relationship with uncertainty itself. The refugee experience had brutally demonstrated how quickly established lives could dissolve, security evaporate, futures disappear. This knowledge could have fostered paralysis or bitter resignation. Instead, Amira had gradually developed what she called flexible certainty, the ability to make plans and pursue goals while maintaining the adaptability to adjust when circumstances changed unexpectedly. This capacity to hold both determination and flexibility simultaneously had become one of her greatest strengths. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, Amira reached her decision. She would accept the nursing program, admission, continuing the journey of rebuilding her professional identity. Not because it replicated her original path, but because it represented a new one aligned with her evolved understanding of her capabilities and purpose. Success would not be measured by how closely her new life resembled her pre-refugee plans, but by how meaningfully she had reconstructed purpose and contribution from the materials available. Rising from the bench, Amira gently touched a tulip bud on the verge of opening. Like this transplanted flower thriving in new soil, she had not merely survived displacement, but found ways to flourish. The journey would continue with new challenges and inevitable setbacks, but she faced them now not as a displaced person, but as someone who had learned to create home wherever she stood. This, perhaps, was the ultimate success, not the absence of struggle, but the capacity to find meaning, purpose, and growth within it. Conclusion. Lessons from the refugee experience. Sadokmai. Community Center auditorium buzzed with anticipation as Amira adjusted the microphone. 6 years after arriving as a bewildered refugee, she stood before a diverse audience gathered for a panel discussion titled Beyond Headlines, Real Refugee Journeys. Looking out at the faces, some curious, some sympathetic, some possibly skeptical, she felt the weight of responsibility in sharing not just her personal story, but insights that might bridge understanding across profound differences in life experience. When I was asked to speak about lessons from the refugee experience, she began, I realized that what I've learned isn't just about surviving displacement, but about what it means to be human in a world where stability can vanish overnight. The audience quieted, and Amira continued, her accented English now confident and clear. Perhaps the most universal lesson is the extraordinary adaptability of the human spirit. None of us know our capacity for resilience until circumstances demand we discover it. Indeed, the refugee experience had revealed the remarkable plasticity of human adaptation, how people forced from everything familiar could learn new languages, navigate alien systems, rebuild professional identities, and create meaning in vastly different contexts. This capacity for reinvention wasn't unique to refugees, but represented a fundamental human quality that often remained dormant until activated by necessity. In an increasingly volatile world where technological change, climate disruption, and economic transformation forced everyone to adapt continuously, the refugee experience offered profound insights about navigating radical change while maintaining core identity. Equally universal was the fundamental importance of belonging. The intense disorientation of displacement highlighted how crucial social connection is to human well-being. We often think of refugee needs in material terms: food, shelter, medical care, Amira explained to the audience. These are essential, but just as important is addressing the invisible wound of severed belonging. The refugee journey revealed that humans require not just physical safety, but psychological security found in community recognition and acceptance. This need for meaningful connection transcended cultural differences and united human experience across divides of privilege and circumstance. The audience leaned forward as Amira continued. My story is not exceptional among refugees. What may be exceptional is having the opportunity to share it with those who haven't experienced forced displacement. Indeed, most refugee stories remained untold or reduced to statistics and broad generalizations that obscured individual journeys. Yet these stories contained wisdom, not just for understanding refugee experiences, but for comprehending fundamental aspects of human dignity, resilience, and connection that applied universally. In amplifying refugee voices, allowing their experiences to inform rather than merely receive policy and assistance, societies gained access to profound insights about human capacity for renewal and adaptation. "If there's one misunderstanding I hope to correct," Amira said, gesturing to include her fellow panelists from Somalia, Myanmar, and Ukraine, "it's the perception of refugees as either perpetual victims deserving pity or exceptional success, stories to be celebrated as model minorities. Most of us are simply ordinary people, responding to extraordinary circumstances, carrying both wounds and wisdom from our journeys." This nuanced understanding recognized the complex reality that refugees simultaneously carried trauma, requiring support and insights deserving recognition, a both-and reality that defied simplistic categorization. The discussion turned to practical implications. What could communities do to better support refugee integration? How might policies be redesigned based on actual refugee experiences rather than assumptions? Several themes emerged from the panel: the crucial importance of language, acquisition support, the need for credential recognition pathways that honored previous education and experience, the value of mentorship connections with established community members, and perhaps most importantly, opportunities for refugees to contribute skills and perspectives rather than merely receive services. As the session concluded, audience members approached with questions and comments. A high school teacher asked about classroom resources for helping students understand refugee experiences. A local business owner inquired about hiring refugees and supporting their workplace integration. A city council member took notes on policy recommendations emerging from the discussion. Each interaction represented a small bridge across the experiential divide between those who had lived displacement and those trying to understand it from positions of relative stability and privilege. Walking home through streets that had once seemed alien but now felt familiar, Amira reflected on how sharing her story had affected her own healing journey. The refugee experience created a permanent before and after division in life, a profound disruption in continuity that could never be completely resolved. Yet, in articulating this disruption to others, in finding words for experiences that had once seemed beyond language, something integrated within her. The story remained difficult but became containable, a chapter rather than the entire narrative of her life. The apartment building came into view, the same one where her family had initially struggled, but now contained memories of growth and connection alongside those early hardships. Her mother would be preparing dinner, probably with additional portions for Mrs. Chen upstairs, and the new Afghan family who had moved in last month. Her father would be reviewing her brother's college applications, pride temporarily overcoming his uncertainty about American university systems. These ordinary domestic scenes represented extraordinary achievements, the reconstruction of family life and daily normalcy from the fragments of displacement. Amira's phone vibrated with a text, message from her nursing program study group, confirming tomorrow's session. Another vibration followed, a notification from the Refugee Assistance Organization where she volunteered, announcing a newly arrived Syrian family needing orientation support. These dual connections, to her future through education and to her pass-through service, formed the bridge she had constructed between her disrupted life chapters. Not a perfect restoration of what was lost, but a meaningful integration of who she had been and who she was becoming. The sun set behind buildings. That had transformed from strange and intimidating to simply home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a difficult exam perhaps, or a cultural misunderstanding requiring patient navigation. But Amira faced these not as a perpetual outsider, but as someone who had earned her place through the hard work of rebuilding. The refugee experience had irrevocably changed her, creating wounds that might never fully heal, but also cultivating strengths she might never otherwise have discovered. In this complex integration of loss and growth, vulnerability and resilience, lay the deepest lesson of the refugee journey, that human dignity persists and even flourishes amid the most profound disruptions, finding new expressions in changed circumstances, but remaining fundamentally intact. And there we have it, friends, the remarkable journey of Amira and her family. From the devastating moment of fleeing their homeland to rebuilding a meaningful life in a new country, their story reminds us that refugee experiences are not just about loss, but about the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. As we've followed Amira's path from displacement to rebuilding, I hope you've expanded not only your English vocabulary, but also your understanding of what millions of people around our world experience when forced to leave everything behind. These stories exist all around us, in our neighborhoods, schools, and workplaces, often untold but filled with profound wisdom about what it means to start again. If you found value in today's story, please show your support by liking this video and sharing it with friends who are learning English or anyone interested in understanding refugee experiences beyond news headlines. Your comments mean the world to us. We'd love to hear your thoughts about Amira's journey, or perhaps share experiences from your own life that connected with elements of this story. Don't forget to subscribe to LMJ English for more stories that help you learn English while exploring the rich tapestry of human experiences. Hit that notification bell so you'll know immediately when we release our next language learning adventure. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, keep practicing your English, expanding your horizons, and remembering that behind every statistic about refugees are individual human beings with stories of extraordinary courage, resilience, and hope. See you in our next lesson. Vocabulary list: refugee. Noun: a person who has been forced to leave their country in order to escape war, persecution, or natural disaster. Example: Amira became a refugee when war made it too dangerous to remain. In Syria, displacement. Noun: the forced movement of people from their locality or environment. Example: the displacement caused by the conflict separated many families from their homes and communities. Resilience. Noun: the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. Toughness. Example: Amira showed remarkable resilience when facing the challenges of rebuilding her life in a new country. Integration. Noun: the action or process of combining with another to form a whole. Example: successful integration involves adapting to the new culture while maintaining important aspects of one's heritage. Adaptation. Noun: the process of changing to suit different conditions. Example: adaptation to the new educational system. Was one of the most challenging aspects of her journey. Bureaucracy. Noun: a system of government with many complicated rules and processes. Example: navigating the immigration bureaucracy required patience and persistence. Assimilation. Noun: the process of taking in and fully understanding information or ideas. Also, the process of becoming similar to something. Example: rather than complete assimilation, Amira preferred maintaining elements of both cultures. Prejudice, noun, preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience. Example: Amira occasionally encountered prejudice from people who made assumptions based on her refugee status. Identity, noun, the characteristics determining who or what a person or thing is. Example: the refugee experience challenged her sense of identity as she balanced her past and present selves. Perseverance, noun, persistence in doing something despite difficulty or delay in achieving success. Example: her perseverance in learning. English eventually led to fluency despite the initial struggles. Discrimination, noun, the unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people. Example: employment discrimination made it difficult for her father to find work matching his qualifications. Trauma, noun, a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. Example: the trauma of fleeing her home country sometimes manifested in anxiety and nightmares. Belongingness, noun, the feeling of being accepted and fitting in as a member of a group. Example: finding a sense of belongingness in her new community took time, but eventually happened through meaningful connections. Acculturation, noun, the process of adopting or adapting to a different culture. Example: acculturation happens gradually, through daily interactions and experiences in the new society. Xenophobia, noun, dislike of or prejudice against people from other countries. Example: some community members exhibited xenophobia by avoiding interaction with refugee families. Advocacy, noun, public support for or recommendation of a particular cause or policy. Example: Amira later engaged in advocacy for better refugee integration policies based on her own experience. Uncertainty, noun, the state of being uncertain. Example: living with uncertainty about the future was one of the most challenging psychological aspects of refugee life. Empowerment, noun, the process of becoming stronger and more confident, especially in controlling one's life. Example: learning. English was a source of empowerment that increased her independence. Contribution, noun, the part played by a person in bringing about a result. Example: Amira's contribution to the healthcare system as a medical assistant brought her great satisfaction. Perspective, noun, a particular attitude toward or way of regarding something, a point of view. Example: her unique perspective as someone who had lived in different cultures became a valuable asset in her career.